talk about security. What is the meaning of resilience? Does it, I guess it's a slightly different perspective that we need to apply here. First of all, some of the Western Balkan states are NATO members. So it's a different connotation, I guess, when we talk about security. Shall we maybe focus more on elements like anti-corruption, anti-organized crime, military spending, these aspects of the security relationship? Or can we also add intelligence to the mix? I think based on the discussion in the first panel, we have actually quite a broad array of elements that we can pick from. And I'm very happy that we have indeed, as Mark said, an all-star panel. Nikola Dimitrov from Skopje, the Deputy Prime Minister for European Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia. Ambassador Frédéric Mondoloni, head of the Continental Europe Division in the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Ambassador Susanne Schütz, Director for Southeast Europe, Turkey and EFTA states at the Auswärtiges Amt. We will have, again, a bit more than an hour. I will ask our panelists maybe to stick to something like 10 minutes. And then we will, again, try to use the Q&A box for our chat with the other attendees. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, do you think the security compact should be part of your portfolio? I guess this is the question to you.
Thank you, dear Vessela. It's great to see you, if only virtually. And both ambassadors, Ambassador Schütz, dear Susanne, and Ambassador Mondoloni, dear Frédéric. I followed parts of the first panel, and I think in terms of setting the context, the European context, I'd like to echo and endorse some of what was already said. I think the European Union is changing, and I think this can be traced back to the EU Global Strategy of 2016, where we see phrases like strengthening resilience in neighborhood and beyond, principled pragmatism. So EU is no longer only what it used to be, which was trying to make up and transform countries into their image. Human rights, rule of law, etc. So we have another dimension, although this geopolitical European Union, what was announced by the President of the Commission, van der Leyen, is also in its early stage. PESCO is not too old. What was it now? December 2017. So these are all new things, probably marking the end of this golden age of the European project that arguably perhaps ended with the financial crisis of 2008 and this trend from multilateralism to multipolar rivalry in a way at a global stage. So I have to be honest, I think when we in the Balkans think about the EU, the security and the military aspects do not really come into mind right away. We think about the giant, powerful European market, and we think about the values and sort of the narrative of free societies, free media, accountability, rule of law, independent judiciary. Those are the things that that come to mind. So it's more the soft power. Then, by contrast with the first panel, I think we have one major distinction, which is the geographic argument for the Western Balkans. Some people often say backyard when referring to the Western Balkans, European backyard, but it's more closer to courtyard because we don't really have an external border that is not European, or a fence or a wall. So we are talking about 6 countries surrounded, encircled by member states, with a promise of the European future dating back to Thessaloniki in 2003, and with this process of stabilization and association. Some are in the accession talks, some are candidate countries, etc., etc. So the security aspects of this region is not only making sure that there is no violence from within or destabilization, but this region is very much an integral part of the European Union's own security. And I think this was quite visible in the context of the migration crisis in 15 and 16, when European external Schengen borders were compromised. The borders of the region became European external borders. And we have cooperated a lot, not only with Frontex, but also with member states bilaterally, in terms of even having their border police contributing with people in making sure that the borders are protected. So I think this is by way of context. And one line also, the first ever EU peacekeeping mission took place in North Macedonia. This was Concordia back in 2003. And only 3 years after, by deploying a helicopter detachment to the EU mission of Altea in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I think we as a nation signaled this movement from a consumer to a contributor of security. We, in terms of the transposition of the EU acquis and all the work that we have in different subcommittees, there is a lot of work already in terms of shaping our own security institutions, especially in some areas, with that of the EU member states. When it comes to fighting terrorism and violent extremism, we have very rich cooperation, especially in particular with some member states. When it comes to cybersecurity issues, facing or fighting disinformation campaigns, there is some cooperation, but I think we can do more. So I think because of the geography of the region, I think we have to invest more in closer cooperation, regardless of the fact whether we are member states or not member states. I think we as a region can gain from it, and the EU as a whole can gain from it. The big question for this region is how we do accession, and I prefer the term completion to enlargement, because the map enlargement is somewhat misleading. The map of Europe will not become bigger once we join, so it's completion. How to do it right? How to convince citizens of Europe that this is also good for them, and how to convince the citizens of the Balkans that this is a real prospect. The region is in a competition, in a race between making the Balkans European, that is importing European standards and acquis, and also bringing more prosperity, so that the citizens of the Balkans can have a European way of life at home, or the problem of brain drain and migrating skilled labor, people losing hope that there is actually prospect in their own countries and moving on their own with their families to member states. So I don't think that we have too much time. And my generation, I am in my on the wrong side of 40s, and I was 18 when we became independent. I think my generation, plus and minus, we have to deliver on this. We have to, in a way, give the next generation a better starting point, so that this is all on track. This is all not very clear. We have a very good new methodology initiated by Paris to make this more realistic, with more political steer, with a bigger stick in terms of irreversibility. But this is not put into practice yet. I think last year, especially by the end of it, was not particularly a very successful year for the European future of the Balkans. We have the COVID-19 challenge and the vaccine challenges throughout the region. I think not only we as Europeans, but we as humans globally failed to respond to a pandemic that has no information about political borders. As a system, I think we had to do better, but it is what it is. We are where we are, and we have to work and improve our cooperation. A wise person said, the spread of knowledge sharing and cooperation must outpace the spread of the virus. And I think we have not managed to do that globally. So I think this year there will be some opportunities. We have to try our utmost to make use of them. On the region, there are some bilateral issues that are problematic for the region. One obvious one is Pristina-Belgrade. We have a special envoy of the European Union dealing with that issue. And I think the Western Balkans is one of the most obvious regions to see if this more geopolitical European Union can actually make a difference. We are yet to see. The strongest tool in this region we have, I've mentioned the geographic argument. The economic argument is very much right behind. This is a region that trades with the European market for over 3/4 of its total trade, both exports and imports. This is a region where similarly close to 3/4 of every foreign direct investment comes from a country from the European Union. So geographically, economically, politically, security-wise, we are in the same boat. So this is only some sort of elements to initiate the discussion. I don't want to be too lengthy, so that we can have a proper debate. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but I also don't want to be unrealistic. I think progress is only possible when we face problems. And we have issues that we have to push and that we have to work. By and large, the countries in the region have a high alignment with the European Common Security and Foreign Policy, perhaps with one exception. And I think this is an area where we need to do maybe even better. It will help if the region is involved, at least on the margins and at least occasionally, in the discussions when these measures are being discussed. And I have to note that this practice of not inviting the region, even for the informal Gimnik meetings of the foreign ministers of the member states, for some, I think, partly objective reasons, in the last several presidencies is something that we need to rethink. It is fair to expect the region to be heard if the region is expected to follow fully the common security and foreign policy of the Union. So I'll stop here, and I very much look forward to our debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Being the representative of the region, I guess we will come back to you with a couple of questions that may not concern North Macedonia specifically, but also the whole region. And I'm aware that this may not be an entirely comfortable position as well, given the exception that you mentioned, but also the fact that if we want to talk about persuading Europeans to continue with enlargement, we do need to address organized crime and corruption in the region. And this is definitely a part of kind of the softer security agenda, I guess, that we ought to be discussing here. But maybe we can come back to that in the second round. Ambassador Mondoloni, you have been posted as ambassador to Serbia. You also have postings in Washington and in Moscow. So there is a lot to say about security from all those different perspectives, I guess. Our American friends now are talking also about fighting weaponized corruption, which I think is a new element. President Biden was underlying this also in his speech at the Munich Security Conference. And this is something that I think resonated also in the Western Balkans. But maybe your take on the security relationship that is not only that is there, but that is possible.
Well, thank you very much, dear Vessela, dear Nicu. Thank you very much. You were kind enough to mention that I was posted in Washington. Just one point, I think this is good news if EU and US are working together with the Western Balkans to stabilize and to enhance the security in the region. So we are looking forward to working closely with the new US administration on these issues, and where I must say we are pretty confident, even if of course we will have debate and of course, but I think this is good news that we will be able to work better together. Before going to the point, and thank you for having invited me to this very useful and I think very timely virtual conference, with the hope that one day we will be able to meet for real, I would say. So before going to my points, and don't want to be too long, I would like to quickly react maybe to what I heard from the Vice Prime Minister Dimitrov. So thank you, Mr. Vice Prime Minister, for your words, and two quick reactions. First of all, I also prefer to talk of completion rather than enlargement as regard to the Western Balkan process. I think, as you rightly pointed out, Europe would not be larger after the completion of the process. This is a long process, of course, but I think that this is a way we should think about it, is to complete it rather than to enlarge it. And I know that this is sometimes very sensitive, including in my own country, for the public opinion and so on, but I think this is a good way to present it. Then about the new methodology, very quickly, thank you also for your words. We hope that the new methodology provides for the good framework. We hope that the negotiating framework with North Macedonia and Albania can be adopted as soon as possible by the Council. We regret the current situation where it was not possible to adopt it before the end of last year. We think this is unfortunate, and as we stand, we are ready to approve the draft negotiating framework. We think it fully reflects the new methodology for enlargement agreed by the Council in March 2020, last year. So therefore, we are ready to approve it and open negotiation with North Macedonia as we speak. And we hope that the bilateral dispute with Bulgaria will be solved as soon as possible. So going back maybe to my point about security, thank you for choosing this theme. I think this is very accurate and very timely, but very broad. So of course, security, this means also, I think at the same time, it's a very broad term. So it means internal security, the domestic matters. We talk about terrorism, we talk about smuggling, about even rule of law, but also external security with defense and geopolitical issues. So I will try briefly to address both aspects. Saying that the stability and security of the Western Balkans are long-standing commitment of the European Union, of course, and also the two stability and security issues are important components of the French vision for the Western Balkans. You know that we have adopted, President Macron has decided to adopt what we're calling a strategy for Western Balkans 3 years ago, and defense and security are fully part of this agenda. This is all the more relevant now because, first of all, on one side, we must be, I would say, clear with ourselves that European perspective of the Western Balkans countries is exposed to external actors' influence in the region. So the Balkans are at a strategic crossroad. Therefore, non-European actors like China, Russia, Turkey are investing in the region a lot. And so I think this is a challenge we have to face together. And also because we do think, as French at least, that the defense is completely part and security are part of the European Union agenda. And the notion of strategic autonomy is at the heart of our vision for Europe, and it will be at the heart of the French vision for during our upcoming EU presidency next year. We will have to build on already successful initiative. Vice Prime Minister mentioned Popescu, of course. We are also talking about European Defence Fund. And we do think that the Western Balkan countries should prepare to become active partners, active participants in the European defense cooperation in the future, and not only, I would say, from the outside, but from the inside. So very briefly, first point, cooperation with the Western Balkans as far as internal security threats are concerned. This is essential to tackle common threats. Biggest challenge, as you rightly mentioned, Vessela, in your introduction, for us, terrorism and radicalization. How to prevent returning terrorist fighters to become a threat to the region and to Europe as a whole. Through the diaspora, legislative tools are needed to prosecute, convict, follow up. Just maybe underlined an interview in one of the big French newspapers this morning by our head of the counterintelligence and counterterrorism, Mr. Nunez, former Minister of Interior. He rightly pointed out that the widespreading of the illegal arms traffic and also return of the foreign fighters in the Western Balkans is for us of particular importance and a serious of concern. And we, I think, need to foster our bilateral cooperation with the Western Balkan countries on this issue. Also worrying, organized crime, you mentioned it, illegal trafficking, weapons, drugs, human beings, which are a threat for security, but also economic stability of the countries. Pandemic is a new challenge I think with restrictive measures and maybe less police controls because of the pandemic. It has given new areas for trafficking and for smugglers. So we expect Western Balkan countries to systematically prosecute and convince smugglers, fight money laundering, and confiscate criminal assets. I think this is, of course, very, very, very important. Just to mention that on this aspect, we are continuing the implementation of the initiative, the French-German initiative to tackle illicit firearms trafficking in the Western Balkans. I am sure that Susanne will continue on that, so I will be short, but for us it's a very important initiative and we are willing to continue on that. We as a member state, we are providing ballistic tracking equipment to interested countries in the region. This will strengthen police cooperation. We also already have grant agreement with Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia and Montenegro, and we are working with Kosovo and Albania on this issue also. On irregular migration, Vice Prime Minister mentioned it on Frontex, very important, need to work closely with the EU, of course. Frontex signed already agreements with Serbia, Montenegro, Albania. Frontex is present in North Macedonia, and we also need to work with Bosnia on that. And it's giving important financial support to Bosnia for decent treatment of migrants. So that will be the first point, how to collectively fight against these common internal security challenges, which are very, very important. The second aspect I will focus on the security dimension by se and the dimension of external security. And as the Vice Prime Minister said at the end of this intervention, I think this is very important for the Western Balkans to move from the security consumers to security providers, and we need to help these countries in this move. Military dimension first, then political dimension. Military dimension, we do think international military presence is still necessary. U4 Altea in Bosnia, K4 in Kosovo, still relevant as a deterrent to potential destabilization threats. The situation is not the same as it was in the end of the 90s or beginning of this 21st century, but still, I think deterrence is very important. We have also supported NATO integration of 4 out of 6 Western Balkan countries. North Macedonia and Montenegro are the latest examples of successful integration into NATO, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend these 2 countries. I was ambassador to Serbia, you were kind enough to mention it, so we respect the sovereign choice of Serbia to remain neutral, but we welcome at the same time the active cooperation between Serbia and NATO. Just to underline that that exercises with NATO are more frequent, more numerous than military exercise with Russia for Serbia. Of course, this is very sensitive, and we all know history and 99 intervention, but I think this cooperation is promising. We encourage also Western Balkan countries to become active partners and take part in external operation, especially, of course, from EU and UN. Altea was mentioned. We welcome Albania's, North Macedonia's, and Serbia's participation in several UN and EU operations, just to mention MINUSCA, EU2M SCA in Central African Republic, EU2M Mali in Sahel, EU9 Atalanta, but also in the FINUL in Lebanon or in Cyprus. On the political dimension, and I'm speeding up a little bit, don't want to be too long. We do think that the European perspective is providing a strong incentive for stabilization and reconciliation, and we again strongly commend North Macedonia for its efforts on good neighborhood relations. Prespa agreement, this is major. Friendship treaty with Bulgaria, and we support efforts to, as I already said, to resolve the dispute between Skopje and Sofia, we hope in the very, very near future. Beyond that perspective, we also think that EU has other tools to support the stabilization of Western Balkans. Member states can provide help, important contribution also. Just to mention briefly, the resumption of the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo during the latest virtual summit, 10 July last year. Of course, this is a long process. This is a hard work for Mr. Lajčák and others, but we are very active, and we hope that this will move forward in a good direction and provide end security for all the region. Also, CFSP, this was already mentioned. The progressive alignment helps to counter the external influences I was mentioning before. We commend 100% alignment of Albania and Montenegro on CFSP position. I know that North Macedonia is very, according to the latest figure, very close to the 100% alignment also. And we encourage Serbia to do better, basically, and to increase its alignment on CFSP. Notion of strategic autonomy, I already mentioned it at the very beginning, will be for us at the heart of the upcoming presidency. We mentioned PESCO, Open Defense Fund. I think there is a place for Western Balkan countries to become more active partners on that. We should try to, as it was already said, to work prior to ask them to join, but in advance to increase the knowledge of our priorities and so on. And so for them to become active participants in European defense cooperation in the future. Point well taken at the Gimnish by the point by Vice Minister Dimitrov. We need to discuss that among us. But I think this is legitimate to ask the question for at least I would say, and I think we need to work on that. Last point on this issue, we do think that bilateral cooperation also contributes to anchor these countries in Europe and in Europe defense. For example, Serbia's acquisition of European military defensive equipment indicates we do think its willingness to diversify its suppliers, and we do think it's good that for the first time these countries, for example, is not buying military equipment only from Russia but for other countries, and we do think this is important for all the region, all the countries of the region. We have put all this together in the so-called French strategy for the Western Balkans. Don't want to be too long, just to underline again that defense and security constitutes 2 of the 4 pillars of this strategy, along with development and economic cooperation. We have significantly extended our defense cooperation with some countries. We need to do the same for the other ones. And we are ready to do it. Next steps, we need to address radicalization and cyber threats. And we wish to share our know-how on the basis of a platform designed to, for example, to track illegal internet content. It's called Pharos in French. And I think this is very important and promising. In conclusion, I would say that, first of all, significant progress were achieved in stabilization of the Western Balkans over the past 15 years. We all play a part in that, but first and foremost, I would like to commend the Western Balkan countries for that. This is their choice, this is their responsibility. There is limited risk of new conflict, but we need to maintain Altea and KFOR for the time being, as we speak, for deterrence. Then important to keep up efforts to resolve outstanding political disputes, Serbia, Kosovo, Bulgaria, North Macedonia. We need to solve them as soon as possible, and for solving them, I would say to show our high-level political commitment. We need to strengthen cooperation on internal security matters with Western Balkan countries. EU per se as an organization and with its member states, and we have common challenges we need to tackle. And to conclude, I would say that this will make it possible for the Western Balkan countries to move from security consumers to security providers. And we need to enhance, or help. This is important to help these countries along that path. Thank you very much. I know, a little bit too long, but I wanted to put the maximum in the minimum time.
Thank you very much. This was rather all-encompassing, so thanks a lot. One small note from me, I saw somewhere the number that Serbia has acquired between 2015 and 2019, 5 times more military equipment than Croatia. And, you know, adding more to that, I don't know how it looks like in the region, but it's very reassuring. But maybe we can dwell on this later. Ambassador Schütz, you also know the region quite well. You have been posted to Albania, but you're also a Slavist by training. You also know the East. You've been posted in Kiev. When you look at this idea for a security compact, it obviously has 2 different connotations for the Eastern neighborhood and for the Western Balkans. But given the complementarity for at least half of the countries with the NATO agenda, where do you think the EU can carve out more of a role in terms of mitigating security risks, but also qualifying as a geopolitical actor in the Balkans?
Well, thank you very much, Vessela, and thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished panel together with my good friends Nikola Dimitrov and Frédéric Mondoloni. I would like to stress that I agree with what has already been said, and I think there is a major difference between the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkans, and that is not only geographically, but one of the reasons is also geographically, but also because of the EU perspective, and I think that will be, and Nikola Dimitrov and also Frédéric already stressed that this makes a very big difference. Nikola already said it, the countries of the Western Balkans are located in the midst of Europe, surrounded by EU member states, and simply looking at a map shows that the security of the EU is inseparably bound up with the security of the Western Balkans. Their geographical location, but also their deeply rooted historic, cultural, and human relations with EU member states make it obvious that we share common interests, but also common security challenges. We are very glad that the times of the cold as well as the hot wars in this region are a thing of the past. Nevertheless, a number of serious threats and potentially destabilizing factors remain, and especially Frédéric has already mentioned them. We're talking about the internal security challenges as well as the external security challenges. And indeed, Frédéric, I'm also glad that you already mentioned the initially joint German-French initiative to systematically reduce the number of small arms and light weapons in the Western Balkans. In many cases, weapons still left over from the war in former Yugoslavia, weapons that continue to cause a great deal of harm in Europe. And this initiative, which has since come under the auspices of the European Union, has already seen some concrete results thanks to really very close cooperation with all 6 Western Balkan states. But of course, there are the other challenges which have already also been mentioned. There's organized crime, there is the large-scale corruption, there are threats from terrorism and radicalization, irregular migratory flows, but then there's also still ethnic strife, nationalism, and also negative demographic trends. And as far as external security challenges are concerned on a geopolitical scale, we must also be aware of the pressures from external actors. They've been mentioned: Russia, China, some instances also Turkey, trying to undermine the Euro-Atlantic ambitions of the countries of the region. Against this background, the Euro-Atlantic integration of the entire Western Balkan region has been a conscious decision by NATO and EU, offering both EU and NATO membership to all Western Balkan states as a strong commitment to solidarity cooperation and mutual understanding. And I'm very glad that Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia are already members, and also the others are cooperating. Even Serbia is cooperating with NATO. So I guess this is very positive. And I do see that also in this case, at least the NATO member states are already contributors. And thank you very much for the contributions. So against this background, we regard Euro-Atlantic integration of the entire Western Balkan region as the best guarantee to ensure peace and stability in Europe. Germany is committed to a constant development of our Western Balkan neighbors towards becoming members in the European Union with strong rule of law systems, stable democratic structures and institutions, as well as flourishing economies. We are convinced that this is not only important for the region itself, but also in the strategic interest for us in the European Union. The promise of EU membership given in Thessaloniki in 2003 is still valid. From our point of view, the EU perspective remains the decisive driver for far-reaching reforms and peaceful coexistence. The EU's decision in March of last year to start accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia therefore sent an important signal to the entire region that difficult but necessary steps, such as the Prespa agreement between Greece and North Macedonia or the highly complex judicial reform in Albania, are paying off. And I must admit, we would have very much liked to hold the first accession conferences still under the German EU Council presidency at the end of last year. And Nikola remembers how much we tried to solve the remaining differences with Bulgaria. And I guess we thought we came very close, but unfortunately there are still things in the way. And now, as we are still part of the trio presidency, we are in close contact with the current Portuguese presidency, and we are hoping that it will be possible to overcome the remaining obstacles very soon, and that still under the Portuguese presidency, the first intergovernmental conferences can be held. While we remain committed to the EU perspective for all 6 Western Balkan countries, there are still many obstacles to be overcome on the region's path into the EU. It was mentioned, we welcome the fact that the normalization dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo was resumed last year under the auspices of Miroslav Lajčák. And in order to solve one of the many stumbling blocks for a peaceful and stable development of the Western Balkan region, it is now important that this dialogue will be taken up again swiftly after government formation in Kosovo, and will be conducted by both sides in a spirit of compromise, with the aim of reaching a comprehensive agreement that solves all open issues on a sustainable basis and that enables both countries to join the EU in the future as members. And another open issue is also Bosnia-Herzegovina. More than 25 years have passed since the Dayton Agreement helped to end a terrible war. While Bosnia-Herzegovina has come a long way, the country still is faced by the dysfunctionality of state structures, as well as, unfortunately, ethnic growing tensions, which have to be overcome. And therefore, we are convinced that Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to be given more attention again by the international community now. It is obvious that our commitment to Euro-Atlantic integration can only extend so far as the Western Balkan countries themselves are seriously committed to ambitious reform programs and EU standards and values. And that means a serious commitment to the rule of law, judicial independence, and the freedom of the media, as well as an engaged fight against corruption and organized crime, all factors which are holding back the region from more positive developments and, unfortunately, also often driving especially young people to leave their homeland and to look for a better future for themselves and their families elsewhere. And I'd like to stress that on these issues, the EU, as EU, but also individual member states are cooperating already very well with the countries in the Western Balkans, but I guess more still needs to be done. And coming to a close, I would like to mention also the Berlin process, which was launched by Germany in 2014 in order to foster the spirit of good neighborliness and cross-border cooperation, not as a substitute for EU membership, but as an additional way of cooperating. And we're very happy that many things were already achieved. And I remember actually exactly 1 year ago, foreign ministers met in Skopje for the meeting under the joint Bulgarian North Macedonian chairmanship. And so we're very happy that this year it's again Germany in the chair of the Berlin process. And so we are looking forward to hosting the Berlin Process Summit in the summer, hopefully in a physical format in Berlin, and in order to give new momentum to regional cooperation through further operationalization of the common regional market and other initiatives, hopefully also realizing the mutual recognition of ID cards. One project, which I remember was also very much started by Nikola Dimitrov. In conclusion, I would like to stress again, the Western Balkans integration into the European and Euro-Atlantic structures is the best investment into the region's stability and security. Therefore, in order to be seen as a realistic option, we now need to take EU integration a step further and open negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you as well. Nikola, you have been quoted several times. You now have the first right to respond. As you can see, there are also a couple of questions in the chat box. I would maybe highlight the one by our colleague Igor Bandovic from Belgrade, who is asking about ESI's proposal on common economic area, on adding the Western Balkans to the European Economic Area, rather. And I still would like to maybe keep the focus of this discussion on the security elements of this, because it is much easier for the EU to talk about to talk about the economic aspects of integration, because these are bread and butter issues. It is much more difficult for it to be an active player in the security realm, and this is why I think this is an interesting discussion. So, Nikola, over to you. Whichever question you want to pick, and also from the statements of the other two panelists.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just went briefly through the questions. One from actually a good friend of mine, Bandovic from Belgrade, with whom we have worked closely in my previous incarnation as a think tanker and a BPAC member. Comment on the recent, well, not so recent perhaps, but recently reinitiated thinking of the European Stability Initiative of Gerald Knaus about sort of a different course for the region, arguably more realistic, etc. I think this only signals that, let's say, the mainstream European policies towards the Western Balkans are somewhat shaken. We've had various debates, significant debates on how to make accession work. And the fact that it is now delayed and not much is happening. This was to some extent remedied with the new methodology, but again, we have a different challenge. Thinkers who would like to see the region more European, in the right sense of the word, are struggling. Policymakers are struggling. I think efforts to gradually introduce the European freedoms in the region are positive, helpful, and useful. The problem is, realistically, can we go in that direction without this strong focus on other aspects as well? The more sort of the political fundamentals of the Copenhagen criteria. Rule of law, the fundamentals of democracy, and whether we can make progress without the promise of membership at the end. Are the pro-reform and pro-European forces in the region strong enough to do that without this tool that is the accession process, the reform tool? So I think we have to debate this seriously, but it only sort of signals that we have to make accession work. Both us in the region, we have to assume our own responsibility, but also member states. So maybe I should keep it at that on that. Many issues were raised. One initiative exactly of the countries we have here represented, both France and Germany, is this initiative to help the region fight against illicit trafficking of arms. I think we've had good meetings. There is a good program in all of the countries in the region. And I think this is a worthy example of how member states can engage also bilaterally or in groups with the region on security issues. Maybe my last point, and I would like to reinforce what I said in my introductory remarks. In this region, we Europeans have to show that we can do things. And I don't think there is a more obvious reason to show that we can resolve problems, we can resolve bilateral disputes, we can move things forward, but the Western Balkans, because of all the arguments that we have been discussing. The promise is there. It has been reiterated during the Bulgarian presidency at the summit in Sofia in 2008. More recently at the virtual Zagreb summit last year in March. But we have to put this European perspective into the perspective of the citizens of the region. And we have to make it more realistic and more tangible. I am an accidental politician, and without any pun intended to more experienced politicians, I try to be as honest. I try to be honest. I think it helps. It's really not easy for me, as someone who is now even in charge of the European integration portfolio for North Macedonia as Vice Prime Minister, to convince the citizens that this is actually happening, that it will happen. We've been a candidate country for a long time. Since 2005, we signed the Association and Stabilization Agreement in 2001. We've had many positive reports of the Commission. We rely on the words of the Council when we make promises to our citizens, and when those words are not followed, our own credibility is at stake, and the credibility of the European Union is also at stake. So we have to do better. We in the region and member states and the institutions in Brussels. While we now wait for the elections in Bulgaria by the end of this month to be over, and we are eager to start discussions with the next government in Sofia. In parallel, we also introduced a plan, Bring Europe at Home, so that we are not only focused on the challenges, but we also continue to produce good news on the reform agenda at home. And the focus of this agenda is the issues covered in the fundamentals cluster. So functioning democratic institutions, rule of law, fight against corruption, reform of public administration, economic and financial governance, plus environment. And we hope that if we deliver, and we have to deliver in these areas, we will keep, let's say, the European agenda alive at home, regardless of the challenges of the formal IGC and the formal accession process. We've seen that the accession on its own is not enough to transform societies. You have to have political will, and you have to produce results in reality on the ground to show that, you know, the vision of the European vision is actually realistic and possible. I'll stop here.
Thanks. There are a couple of questions coming in via various channels, and maybe we can come back to you at the end with at least one of them. I would take Rob Newton's one on whether there is a EU contingency plan if Pristina-Belgrade dialogue would fail, and whether there would be a significant challenge to the Western Balkans security and hinder North Macedonia aspirations to engage with the EU. And there is a question also on Bosnia-Herzegovina, which I would maybe address to Ambassador Schütz, whether there would be some action on yesterday's decision of the National Assembly of Republika Srpska to reject a new high rep, and how would that, you think, play out? Because we talked also, you mentioned also Bosnia-Herzegovina's dysfunctionality as part of the security issue as well. One more question here on prioritization. This can maybe go also to Ambassador Mondoloni, because you mentioned everything that is at the table. Maybe you can give us a bit of a sense what you would consider more of a priority, the internal or the external security aspect. I think we can leave it at that at this point, and then we can do another round if we have time. Ambassador Mondoloni, maybe we can go with you next.
Thank you very much, Vessela. You're right. I think there is a need to prioritize. You're sure. I was again struck by the latest comments of Vice Prime Minister Dimitrov, and I do think this is quite right. We need to stay engaged and to move forward and to give good signals to the population. And we can understand that this is not always easy to advocate for EU in Western Balkans right now, especially when you're Vice Prime Minister for European Affairs in North Macedonia. But still, progress were made, courageous decisions were made, especially by North Macedonian people, also referring to Prespa agreement and so on. After some debates and so on, I think now we have solid, accepted, we do think useful new methodology to move forward. And so in terms of priority, just to answer to your last question, I will say that first of all, I think I see two methods. First of all, solving pending regional issues. And Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, of course, is key. Susanne elaborated on this, so I don't want to be too long, but you know how France and Germany are really working on this issue together to help Mr. Lajčák as a EU special envoy in this issue. We are working on this on a daily basis, and including, I think, at the highest level, which is very important. Now that we will have soon, I guess, a new government in Kosovo. We need to move forward and not to lose too much time. We will have presidential elections in Serbia in next year, so there is a little window of opportunity to try to move forward. It will not be easy, but I think it's very important to move, let's say, from the formation of the new Kosovo government to the next election in Serbia. We need to have progress, if possible, this year on the issue, and we are ready to commit ourselves to push in that direction. Dispute with regard to the I would say to North Macedonia, the Prespa agreement is behind us, but we need to be remain cautious. But now we have to solve the issue with Bulgaria. Here again, we've got a little window of opportunity after the next Bulgarian elections. We commend the efforts by the German presidency last year. They were not successful, unfortunately, and we must be clear among ourselves that this sent very bad signals to other countries, including in the region, but also, of course, outside the region. And so, frankly speaking, I think this is the second priority with Serbia-Kosovo dialogue is to, and maybe the first in terms of calendar, is to try to solve right after the next Bulgarian election this issue of between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. For France, said like this, we do think that the latest, I will say, compromise solution facilitated by the German presidency of the Council are helpful. The position proposals which were made public just after during the German presidency. The second very huge, I think, important priority will be the fight against internal security issues, drug trafficking, return of terrorism, illegal migration. This is very important for the Western Balkans countries per se themselves, because this is their security also, but also, of course, to secure a good perception of these countries in the EU, and so to be able to move forward to the EU integration. That would be my long answer to your short questions. Sorry.
If you don't mind, I will add just one small bit. It seems that for the people in the region, much bigger threat than, for instance, interethnic conflict is the threat posed or the risks through organized crime and corruption. People are very worried, and I think people expect to be helped by the EU on that. Do you think there is a way to create kind of a process in helping them, with a focus especially in those areas which does not is not part necessarily of the acquis, because of all the difficulties that one can see. Is there, let's say, a special tool, or do you think that could be something that can be done bilaterally by member states, I mean, rather than at the EU level?
Well, I think you're right. We need to think out of the box maybe on this. For sure, the rule of law is key, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I mean, solving regional issues are very important. I mentioned Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Serbia, Kosovo, but this is not sufficient to have on the long term a real stability and security of the region. I mean, we need to create also the fundamentals, which is, as you said, also fight against corruption and organized crimes, which are very, very important threats, which are undermining all the things that we are trying to build in this region. So I think we need to develop our bilateral efforts also from countries on Western Balkans, and be very strict and on this. And I know that serious politicians and serious countries in this region knows that solving regional problems, even if it's important, are not sufficient, and that we need to also to cope with this issue of rule of law in general, and in fighting organized crimes in particular. Very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Ambassador Schütz, both on the regional issues and maybe on the Bosnian question in particular.
Yes, let me start with the Bosnian, or rather the decision of the Republika Srpska yesterday. Yes, indeed, we believe this requires a reaction. It is unacceptable the way that Dodik and also the parliament pronounce themselves against the High Representative as a representative of the international community. What kind of reaction this will be, this is at the moment under consideration together with our Quint partners along with the EU. So it's unfortunate. It's not really a surprise, because it's the usual kind of response that one gets from Republika Srpska. But this is one of the problems that the state of Bosnia-Herzegovina is asked into question. Your question on anti-corruption, I would like to mention simply from also my experience in Albania, that there are a number of programs already in existence by the EU, by EU member states, bilaterally, or also in twinning programs, that is in trilateral cooperation. And there are other support. There's Greco from the Council of Europe. So there are many ways actually of supporting the countries to create the necessary structures in order to prevent corruption, and of course also to fight corruptive practices. It's underway, but more needs to be done. And as Nikola Dimitrov rightly said, it also takes the political will, maybe sometimes even the courage of countries to go against corruptive practices. And I would also like to comment on the suggestion of the European Economic Area as an alternative to EU membership. I know that Gerald Knaus has been promoting this for a while, and I think I would be very wary of following this idea, because giving up on Plan A being EU integration, means that what is really driving reform forces, what is driving countries, and also as a leverage for the EU to tell the Western Balkan countries that, for example, corruption, you have to fight corruption, you have to meet the EU standards. I guess without that leverage of EU membership, it will be less attractive. And I think we should not give up on Plan A, but rather try to convince our publics in the EU that it's in our joint interests. It's a strategic decision also in the interest of the EU to have the Western Balkan states as real members. So there we come back to where we actually started. But I think we should not give up on Plan A.
Thank you very much. Nikola, the last words will be yours. If you want maybe also to address again the possibility of Serbia-Kosovo dialogue not going as well or not going as quickly in terms of the regional stability. I think there were also a bunch of questions with regard to Russia and China. I don't know if you want to take that as well.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to sound repetitive, maybe not exactly today, but elsewhere. We live in a region that is so rich in history that we occasionally find it problematic to, let's say, stand up from these trenches and talk more and work more on our future. There are so many disputes in the region. Some are very deeply entrenched. And I think that one of the biggest ones is obviously this Pristina-Belgrade dialogue. The European perspective as an incentive played a big role in, let's say, the first pillar of this relationship, which was the Brussels Agreement, accomplished under Ashton when she was the High Representative. So in many ways, these are interrelated issues. Let's say the inability of North Macedonia to start the accession process after doing something that was that often seemed impossible, resolved a difference over the name of the country, a difference that lasted for almost a quarter of a century, and Europe still not being able to move, even though we were in the waiting room for so many years, generations because of that, sends a very negative signal to countries involved in this problem, Belgrade and Pristina. So I think we have to try to do better on all files. And of course, when you use the European future as an incentive, it must be done with caution, because we should resist the temptation to overly politicize accession. If it's used only to reward resolution of bilateral disputes, then we hurt the transformative effect of accession. Progress towards the EU must depend on how we do on reforms. It cannot only be a reward for resolving bilateral disputes or a penalty for not resolving bilateral. So I think it will take a lot of wisdom, both on the EU side and on the side of the region, to make the right combination to make things work. But at the same time, the status quo is not productive. And I think we have to try to move and change and resolve problems. I often say, half jokingly, that once we overcome our own issues, and I think we have hopefully the last one, we're going to become the mediators of the Balkans, because we don't have open territorial issues, and I think we can help others. On a positive side, I think we've all witnessed more regional solidarity in spite of many existing differences. And I think this outcome of the last summit of the Berlin process, co-hosted by Sofia and Skopje, the Prime Ministers Borisov and Zaev, of gradually moving towards a regional market, is probably a good thing, as long as this is not seen as an alternative to European integration. But I'm sensing more solidarity in the region and more acknowledgement that the success of one is good for the region. The failure of one is bad news for the whole region. The more we think in those terms, the easier it's gonna be. I was somewhat diplomatic on purpose in this last reaction.
Thank you very much. I still will emphasize what you said at the beginning of the last reaction, that maybe they can be carrots and sticks outside the enlargement process, that we should not use the enlargement as a panacea for everything and as a reward and a punishment for everything. I think this is why this security cooperation conversation is so important, because there are, if we think out of the box, I think ways to create incentives for reforms, but also to mark backsliding on some, which are vital also for European citizens. And we at ECFR are going to try and think a bit more on that, and we will keep you posted. But before that, let me thank very much our three panelists, Ambassador Schütz, Ambassador Mondoloni, and Deputy Prime Minister Nikola Dimitrov for this excellent conversation. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone. All the best.
Stay healthy.
You too.